Hello, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching News in Depth. Polish President Karol Nawrocki wants Germany to pay war reparations. The political conflict between the presidential palace and Donald Tusk's government continues as the president travels this week to the US. Ursula von der Leyen's plane has been jammed by the Kremlin and the EU is ready to send its peacekeeping troops to Ukraine. To talk about the main stories of the day, we're joined by our very own Jasser, the Deputy Director for News at TVP World. Good afternoon, Adam.
Good afternoon.
So, President Karol Nawrocki is calling on Berlin to pay war reparations. The way he does it is quite particular. Let's give it a listen.
In order to build a partnership with our Western neighbor based on truth and good relations, we must finally resolve the issue of war reparations from the German state, which I, as the President of Poland, unequivocally demand for the common good and for our future. War reparations will not be an alternative to historical amnesia. Poland, as a frontline state, the most important country on NATO's eastern flank, needs justice, truth, and clear relations with Germany, but also reparations from the German state.
So, in order to build good relations with Germany, Germany has to pay war reparations. Where's the logic in that?
Yeah, the logic is clear. I mean, he's saying you want to do business with me, pay up. You know, I think you wouldn't find too many people in Poland who would disagree about Germany paying Poland for...
The last year's survey showed nearly 60% of Poles supporting this idea. And, it's quite understandable why they want war reparations from Germany. But given,
But there's a small problem there. Very small problem. It's really so small that it almost doesn't count. How to be successful in this endeavor? Mr. Nawrocki and his political movement, Law and Justice, has been talking about these reparations for about 20 years. They've had, in the meantime, two presidents, both one serving 1 5-year term and the other 10-year term. And now it's their third president coming into office, making the same promise. Somehow, the delivery is still missing.
But is it because it is legally impossible, or is it simply wiser for Poland, to maintain good relations with Berlin, not to antagonize Germany? But I guess this message is also, for the domestic audience rather than to policymakers in Berlin.
You nailed it. It's not really addressed. And, I was a little ironic in my previous answer to you. But you nailed it. It's not really about addressing Germany, because if the president wanted to be successful in this endeavor, he would probably use diplomatic means to discuss this issue, right? He hasn't yet been to Germany. He hasn't met his German counterpart. He hasn't talked to Chancellor Merz about this issue. He's making a public statement on the day of the anniversary of the war that Germany started with Poland, which had tragic consequences for the Polish nation, and he is addressing the Polish nation with this. So he's basically sending a signal that he is going to be tough on Germany, that he doesn't deviate from Law and Justice talk about reparations, but he even goes a step further, saying, if you want good relations with Poland, you need to pay up.
Do you think it will help his falling public support? He has just lost 5%. Now, given this stable support of the idea of reparations in Poland, do you think it can help his political agenda?
Well, I think it's very early days of his presidency, so I wouldn't pay too much attention to opinion polls showing he has less support than, let's say, a month ago, because this is very early. But I will be boring and I will say delivery matters. So he's promising a lot of different initiatives. He's promising to be a very active president, assuming much greater role than actually the Constitution provides for. And now the question is he going to deliver? And this is, he in a sense put himself here at some risk, because he's promising to deliver these reparations, and let's see 5 years down the road if he can deliver. His predecessors, as I said, somehow didn't manage.
The Prime Minister has already responded to Karol Nawrocki's claims, and Donald Tusk wrote, "We need to understand where this great danger comes from today. We need to understand who is a friend and who is a foe." How to interpret these words?
Well, one surprising thing about these reparations is that very often the same parties and the same people who demand reparations from Germany for the atrocities of World War II, they're completely silent on reparations from Russia. You know, somehow the subject of Polish losses under the Soviet occupation, the murder of Polish prisoners of war in Katyn, hundreds of thousands sent to Siberia and then persecuted under communism, this never pops up.
Well, because they tend to say that you cannot negotiate these issues with Russia, but you can do it with Germany.
Making a formal request. So, you know, because this is the paradox. From a legal point of view, and you alluded to that, from a legal point of view, these reparations seem to be moot. Even Law and Justice Foreign Minister at some point, Madame Fotyga, admitted as much. So they are arguing that it's a moral obligation, these reparations, right? Because Poland in the 50s, under the Soviet duress, of course, but renounced the reparations. And later on, it was confirmed through different processes. So in a sense, it's also indicative that none of the governments that have talked about reparations very loudly actually filed this motion in any of the courts. So yes, there is a moral obligation. So my question is, why aren't the Polish leaders making a similar moral argument against Russia?
Because it's good to talk about it rather than do something about it, I guess.
No, I think it's a deeper problem. I think the problem is that we're witnessing a consistent stream of anti-German rhetoric coming from certain wings of the Polish political establishment. And this focuses on the past and forgets the present. So there's no strategy for the future here, really, or even acknowledging the role Germany played in, I don't know, bringing down communism in Eastern Europe, helping the Solidarity movement, and also pouring billions of euros or other currencies into Poland and other Central and Eastern European countries once they joined the EU. So, you know, it's just, to me, it's playing to the stereotypes. It's trying to revive the historical grievances, which are natural, as you yourself said, but it's used for political purposes mostly.
Karol Nawrocki in 2 days will be visiting the White House. Well, obviously to meet with his American counterpart, and he has been given clear instructions from the Polish government what to say and what not to talk about. Now, given this conflict, tug of war, if you will, between Polish president and prime minister, do you think he will follow these instructions?
It's very hard to say. He's got the instructions. He can deviate from them. And obviously, the fact that his officials appeared to have leaked.
Why do you think this happened?
Unprecedented. But, you know, I think in the world of global politics, we see disruptive politicians doing unprecedented things. So I don't think we should be surprised anymore. But it's interesting because in that instructions, there were a few pointers how to conduct the negotiations with the Americans. And, you know, remember, Poland is a sovereign state. And it doesn't have to agree blindly to everything Donald Trump and the American administration, any American administration wants from Poland. And I remember many times where Poland didn't see eye to eye with the Americans on different issues. But it's been dealt in a, let's say, first of all, there was a consensus among the main political forces, how to deal with that. And then the negotiations were conducted in a proper diplomatic way. Here we have a rather unprecedented situation that the president is trying to ridicule the instruction by leaking it. So it's hard, but you know, even if he deviates from that instruction and follows his own agenda, although it's very hard to pin down what exactly is that agenda, his officials have been not that forthcoming with what he really wants to achieve during that trip. then the government can disavow this. They can say, well, sorry, but he stepped out of his authority. He has no lever, no constitutional lever to change Poland's foreign policy against the government's will, because the government, and the constitution is very clear about that, the government is in charge of foreign policy.
Yes, but wouldn't it be also smart for the Polish government to come to some sort of an agreement with the president that, okay, you talk to the American partners because you clearly have, they like you better, to put it simple, and we take care of all the European and the rest of issues.
Absolutely. And I think that was the deal with the previous president, Andrzej Duda. Donald Tusk, and up to a point also Foreign Minister Sikorski, left the Americans to President Duda. But the difference this time is that President Duda was more or less in line with the government on how to handle the Americans. There may be some differences of opinion, but in general they had the same policy. Mr. Nawrocki says that he wants a different approach. We don't exactly know what that different approach yet is, and I think this is making the government a little nervous about his conduct, and the leaking of this document obviously doesn't build trust. And, foreign policy needs trust between the actors, particularly on the same side.
Right, there's more to this visit, because it seems that Karol Nawrocki will not only be representing Poland, but he also held these meetings with heads of state of the Baltic states and Denmark. Therefore, he'll be speaking on their behalf. So now this is getting problematic for the Polish government, I guess, if the president wants to follow his own agenda on this matter.
Well, look, again, I think President Nawrocki is very new to this game. He has no previous diplomatic experience. He has no government experience. So he may imagine certain things about how foreign policy is conducted, and I think there will be a lot of reality checks for him. So the question that you ask about, whether he is going to represent Eastern Europe, then the real question is, do you really believe that a meeting with 3 presidents and the Danish Prime Minister can be summarized as they authorize him to represent them in the White House?
It happened for a reason.
The meeting?
Yes.
Well, you can't exclude the possibility that he wants to build reactions, hear their opinions, and then he may convey those opinions. But if you actually look at the issues, it's not hard to discern that the Baltic countries and Denmark have a radically different approach to, for example, Ukraine than Mr. Nawrocki. They all support Ukraine's accession into NATO. Then they don't make it conditional on settling historical issues. They're much more behind Ukraine than Mr. Nawrocki, who during his campaign used rather tough language on Ukraine, reminding more of Viktor Orban than the Baltic states. So ask yourself this question: to what extent these Baltic states would like to be represented in Washington by someone who stands slightly different from them on a key issue today, which is Ukraine?
Maybe they simply don't want to travel to the US by plane. It seems it's very dangerous these days to travel by plane, as witnessed by Ursula von der Leyen.
Let's settle on this compromise, yes. They probably think that.
What do you think of this Russian attack on Ursula von der Leyen's plane's GPS system?
Well, I think the Russians are sending a very strong signal to Donald Trump primarily that, they're not really interested in peace. And they're sending a strong signal to the Europeans that they will harass them if they decide to provide a force, for example, for Ukraine, because it coincided with the announcement that European capitals are actually preparing the rule book for possible engagement in Ukraine. And it also happens at the time that Vladimir Putin is meeting President Xi and the Indian Prime Minister in China with a rather blunt anti-American message. So Putin is very good at this game. They've been playing this game with the West for many years.
The question is whether this was a warning that they knew that eventually the plane would land, or was it an attack?
No, it wasn't. It was a warning. It was just messing and sending a signal. Look what we can do. We can disrupt you. And they've been doing this disruption across Europe for several years now. Fires, arson, all these things. And here in our studio, we had one of the high-ranking NATO officials saying, it's not a hybrid war. It's de facto already a war on a scale that is perhaps a little under the radar, but it's war. And I think this is part of the same signaling.
Yeah, hybrid war is a Russian term, right? We should remember this.
That's what people understand.
They came up with the term
Yeah.
to legitimize the illegal actions around Europe and the rest of
hybrid war is illegal by definition.
Absolutely. So, so Karol Nawrocki is traveling to the US. Ursula von der Leyen is talking about European boots on the ground in Ukraine, which Vladimir Putin says a strong no to, and Vladimir Putin is in China these days. Now, do you think his allies, is it in their interest to keep this war going? Because Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, said today that the war should end as soon as possible. But should we take these words seriously?
Well,
given the great business opportunities India has in Russia and vice versa.
I think the motivations of the Indian government and the Chinese government may be slightly different. I think India is approaching this first opportunistically because they could buy cheap Russian oil and then re-export it. And they have a tradition, when they were non-aligned, of having deep relationship with Russia. Okay, so historically and opportunistically, India is taking this middle road. For China, it's different. China,
but you say it's still taking the middle road, but it seems to me it's pivoting so much towards Russia.
Okay, what I wanted to say that it's different from the Chinese, who definitely want Russia to win, because a Russian defeat in Ukraine is a setback also for the Chinese, because everyone understands now that Russia has effectively become a vassal state of China. So if your vassal loses, you're also losing. And the Chinese also look at it from the point of view of a potential aggression against Taiwan. So if Russia couldn't defeat Ukraine, and if the West stood united and provided Ukraine with what it needs to defend itself, there is a lesson there also for Taiwan and the risk associated with potential attacking Taiwan.
Well, the question is,
India has no dilemma of this sort. Okay, so that makes the difference between India and China.
Whether the West is really united in opposing Russia. Ursula von der Leyen wants to send European soldiers as peacekeepers to Ukraine. But will it ever work without the US boots on the ground? And I have a following question. What do you think of this idea of sending American private military companies to Ukraine?
There's a lot of speculation out there. And I think people are testing ideas which are not necessarily really in the making, but they just want to see the reaction. Paradoxically, you could argue that if Russia was able to pretend it was sending little green men, it wasn't sending little green men to Crimea and Ukraine, and that they had nothing to do with it. And if you take at face value Putin's declarations that he will not accept Western troops, then perhaps a volunteer army is the right answer. I'm laughing about this, although this is a serious matter, but it shows that there are different ideas now circulating. And going back to your first question about the Western unity, I think there's much more unity these days. And I think the fact that President Trump, in his sometimes convoluted way, but nevertheless, reassured the Europeans that the US will backstop them if they decide to send forces to Ukraine through intelligence, through command and control, through air superiority.
Right.
That shows that there is still a minimum of unity. And the other thing, which maybe brings us back to our first topic, which is that Germany is ready to pay for it for the first time. on a significant scale. So, Trump's argument had been in the past that Europe wasn't doing enough to take care of its own security and wasn't doing enough to support Ukraine. These ingredients have changed, and so has Trump's rhetoric.
And we have to put a full stop here, Adam. Adam Jasser, Deputy Director for News at TVP World, was our guest this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you
so much, and thank you for watching, and stay with us for more interviews and news here on TVP World.